Martijn, dear friend, a very warm welcome to my podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So again, I see you as a great friend and also an example. How I know you is you've really been an example of compassion and embodying the philosophy that for me often sticks on a theoretical level. Forgiveness. So I really see a lot of the kind of Buddhist precepts alive in you. But how would you describe yourself for people who don't know you as well as I do? Who is Martijn? And can you maybe share something that you don't always share about yourself?
Wow, come straight to the deep end. It's not my favorite thing to describe myself, honestly. It's like I experience myself as just completely ordinary. But I can say I've lived quite a unusual life, and I feel like I've had the fortune to be able to sustain myself following my passions and my obsessions and my curiosities and so I've yeah I've I'm a meditator, I'm an entrepreneur, I've studied interdisciplinary science and philosophy, I've run startups in the psychedelic space, facilitated, collaborated in research, um, developed trainings, done coaching. Those are all things I've done, and um, um, so that doesn't necessarily describe me. Uh, I know I feel like I'm a very happy husband, I have a beautiful partner, and I love to create meaningful containers for people to have transformative, impactful experiences that last, and hopefully, my intent is that people experience some form of liberating insight, something that, reduces sometimes the friction that people feel or the heaviness of their lives. Um, and often that is, like you mentioned, it's been influenced by Buddhism deeply because that was the wisdom path um, that found me when I was going through a spiritual crisis. And it's been something that has been deeply enriching in my life. It's been a true refuge, as they say in Buddhism, a place where a very safe place, a nourishing place that um, has brought me a lot of clarity and ease and spaciousness and a deep sense of wonder, and that's been such a gift. Challenging gift and uncomfortable and um, it's been the commitment on the path is quite high, but at the same time, over time for me, a lot of other things have fallen away, and kind of my spiritual path has over time become like the most important thing, and that I guess is hard to resonate with if that's not part of your lived experience. Uh, so I guess that's maybe rare, but um, so yeah, I like to combine those things. I see entrepreneurship, or I see the power of organizations in our current our current way of life as a very powerful vehicle to introduce people to alternative ways of looking, alternative ways of practicing in a ways that develop wisdom and compassion. And I find that beautiful. I find that in my studies and my explorations, that I found that to be the most meaningful thing to spend my time on, and it's been so valuable to me. It's been such a gift that it's an honor to be able to share that with other people.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and you started out by saying going right into the deep end, but you are one of my deepest friends, and I experience you as in a very positive way, as a very intense person. Um, always challenging the status quo, always asking the question behind the question, and I really appreciate that. You mentioned earlier just now that you had a spiritual crisis. Can you say a few words about that, and also what was it in Buddhism that kind of helped you?
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a very sweet follow-up. I think the crisis I was in was an expression of the crisis of the West, meaning as children of the Enlightenment, we adopted or inherited certain beliefs about um, time, about meaning, about matter, about what happens after death, like fundamentally who we are, what we are here to do. And it has had tremendous positive impact and insights. Like the whole Western scientific tradition is built on that. Our technological, um, you know, unimaginable progress on that level. It's all rooted in those fundamental insights, and at the same time, um, something seems to be missing. And so I felt like I was really playing out the logic of the Western hedonistic, capitalistic, kind of hyper individual, like success oriented individual. And I don't come from a very successful family, and I never thought I would be successful, but that was kind of like the dream. Like if I would hit these, you know, financial milestones, I the promise was, or the promise that I bought into was, I would not have to deal with a lot of my suffering. I would be happy. I would be, I would have all the things. And um, through luck and fortune, I ended up experiencing a lot of that already when I was 21, and totally unexpected and a total disappointment. And because I suddenly had the financial freedom that I was really longing for, and was very intense about reaching, and um, the suffering was still there, or it was even more intense. And now I suddenly didn't have a a a path or an aim. Like if I just have that, if I just fight for that, so I suddenly had before I had the suffering, but also purpose, like trying to get away from the suffering, even though the means wasn't necessarily the most skillful. But at that point, the suffering was there, intergenerational suffering. I had a lot of difficulty with OCD. I had sensitivity to addiction. I think, pretty nihilistic and depressed, and and I didn't know how to orient myself anymore, and because I suddenly didn't have that aim. And what Buddhism gave me was a completely different path, as not outward accumulation of material things, but inner cultivation of virtue. And and I think a lot of different conditions came together that allowed me to step into that. One was, the first monastery I visited, I felt truly at home, and I felt peace in a way that I hadn't in a very long time. I also made really dear friends for life that supported me through my difficulties beyond what I had experienced before, with such kindness and forgiveness and all these qualities. Like, wow, this is what I've been wanting. This is these connections, and this level of depth to relationship, and that was really beautiful, and it was really like, yeah, like coming home. um and I could see the um the path working. I saw that meditation was quickly kind of reducing the worst of my suffering. It was also something that was like a kind of a way of looking that was rationally defensible. And it fit my ontology, and so
I
that
didn't
helped
quite
a lot.
understand that. What do you mean radically defensible, or what did you say there?
Post rationally
Ah,
defensible. So
right.
it wasn't like a dogma that I had to accept. It was something like, try it out, and if you see the results, great. If you don't, discard it. And that openness, that really resonated with me. Um and so the compassion, the meditation, the wisdom from Buddhism um really gave me a path and a purpose, and a way to actually be skillful around the difficulties I had been experiencing.
Wow. Yeah. I'm happy I met you because I got a little touch of that. That I find kindness so beautiful, and I've seen that in you.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, kindness is kind of a mission that I'm on personally. I
Mm-hmm.
heard you say also a phrase that sounded a lot like a way of looking, and that made me think of Robert Bea, who you list on your
Mm-hmm.
website as one of your influences. Can you say a little
Mm-hmm.
bit about his influence on your way of looking?
Yeah, yeah, huge. I think I think he was brilliant in his understanding and application of this fundamental, crucial understanding in Buddhism of emptiness, which basically means there's no. It's technical, and it takes a lot of context to understand it properly. But it basically means there are um, no inherent essences of anything to be found. And and often sometimes people feel that that's a bleak. There's no fundamental foundation to be found. And um, but the working with it opens this sense of freedom. If things are not inherently fixed, that means in essence, you're already completely free to work with things skillfully. It really opens up the range, and I think he teaches that really, really beautifully. Um, and an example for like, if you haven't trained with contemplative practices, a lot of people's experience is that the world is as it is, and there are positive things and negative things, and they are independent of our observation. But through meditation, you can actually see, wow, on a very, very subtle and super fast, so it's hard to perceive level, we fabricate negative and positive. And so you can be free of that. You don't have to do that. And that means suddenly the level of preferences and the fixations that we have, and the level of stuckness that we can get into, is drastically reduced. And that gives you much wider and much opener playing field. Life becomes playful, um and that rabbit hole goes as deep as the universe. It goes all the way to the non-ground of being. And that's, I think, the radical freedom that can happen on this path, where um, experience is experience, but you don't have to label it or categorize it with all of these kind of mental superimpositions. And that is, once you increase that capacity, you actually see that happening, especially when it comes to the elements that are difficult, like our frustrations, our judgments, our depressions, our um, that can, for me at least, that gives at least enough space to not um, like loop out or escalate, or uh, like things become a lot more manageable and easeful and joyful. And and Rob is I think someone who embodied that really beautifully and taught it very beautifully and explained it very beautifully. And he's a deep inspiration for me, because um, he took those insights and ran with it in such a way that it became incredibly creative and life affirming and useful, in the sense of like, hey, this can be useful beyond just our personal path, our individual liberation. This can actually be ways in which we can navigate kind of the polycrisis over time. And Um, and I think that is such a gift, and something we really need, in our day and age, because I think the crisis I went to is a crisis of the West. And I think a lot of people are like a lot of identity is based on consumerism and status and competition. And what we're seeing now, that with our technological might, it plays out on the global stage, and the consequences are so like all um encompassing. It's been like it's so far reaching that we're destroying our home. You could go as far as poisoning our lungs and our blood and our like like everything is full of either carbon dioxide poisoning or forever chemicals or microplastics, and there's no alternative. It seems like we're playing this logic out all the way to the end, and the end is going to be very, very painful for a lot of people and beings, and so many beings have already lost their way of life, and that's very saddening to me. And um so I think we need alternative stories, alternative ways of relating that are not based on that um deep sense of being justified in extraction and exploitation. And I think the whole Western notion of the individual and of ownership, um, that implies that logic that it's okay to do that. And from a Buddhist view of interdependence and interbeing, um, that will have consequences, karmic consequences, and often we don't want those. But we're very much hypnotized by these grand dualisms, and therefore we can't see that very clearly. And so I think contemplative practice like Buddhism, but also philosophy and meditation in general, or psychedelics, or therapeutic modalities, um, can help us decondition or dehabituate some of the mental overlay and start to see, wait a minute, um, there's a lot more going on that we're part of, as opposed to um, being just a silent background of things that we don't really notice.
Mhm.
Sorry, there was a lot there, but that's
Yeah, no,
that's
I
something.
really enjoy it. Yeah, thank you for that, and I really love how you're weaving things you said before together. And I'm really getting a sense of urgency from you, and not just now, but
Hmm.
also, of course, I've seen your outings on social media, etc. I always get this sense of kind of ethical urgency. Is that why you created your new program? You call it
Hmm.
Upayosis. Can you say a bit about that? And also, what does that mean, Upayosis? I couldn't quite find that.
Hmm. So Upayosis is based on the fundamental notion in Mahayana Buddhism, which is the great path, or the white path, where it's not just about your individual awakening; it's about our collective um, um, care for each other, and that's that as a path to awakening. And a key notion within that is upaya, which means skillful means, and it basically means that any practice or any mode of participation in something, if that leads to wisdom and compassion, and therefore to awakening, is valid. And one of the most powerful, potent, impactful modes of practice, that if you do it intentionally with skill and with care, that I think fits that bill, is psychedelic. And so osis means process. So upayosis is the process of applying skillful means, and it's this ongoing conversation. Okay, what is skillful? What actually leads to a form of awakening that is traditional and fits into the tradition, and at the same time is open to um, uh, perhaps skillful means that weren't classically considered in the tradition. Even though there is some there it's likely that there was some psychedelic use in different ways. Um, and if you open up to the definition of anything that manifests aspects of our mind, then you could easily say that forms of pranayama or the yana states or tumo or other forms of tantric practice are forms of our psychedelic experiences. We just
Mm.
don't normally we think only psychedelic experiences are the things that we experience when we take a psychedelic, but that's a very limited way of looking and I think also incorrect. Um,
Yeah.
so so the urgency, just to come back to that, I am very passionate about um, quite a few quite a few things. Um, but I think the ecological crisis is something that is just unacceptable. And at the same time, I want to acknowledge there are no easy answers. Like we are very dependent on hydrocarbons and oil, and we don't have clear technology right now to replace that on the scale that we need to prevent suffering. And so it makes sense that every person and every nation state and every company, they will continue to use cheap labor, cheap energy, like stored sunlight. That is to stay alive, to heat our homes, to cook our food, to produce our food, and um, at the same time, the consequences of that on other beings and on future generations is obscene. It's the destruction and the speed at which it will go and the inability to turn that back and the destruction that will happen is something we will have to contend with. There's just no way around it. Our way of life is incredibly unsustainable. Like I'm currently in the US and the amount of consumption that happens here is, I think, the highest in the world per person. And it's incredibly high. But there's very, very little awareness of the the impact on others or the externalities. And at one point we will have to pay that price. And so I'm with this program, I'm anticipating what do we need as a way from that coming world that is in a way still quite unknown, but there are, it cannot continue the way it has. And I think it will have, um, it the path towards it will be, you know, colored by suffering of so many people and beings. What's that path look like? What does a potential path look like? And I think wisdom traditions will have a really big role to play, and they will need the most potent, most skillful ways of going that transformation, anticipating that, building resilience, building capacity, collaboration, and cooperation. And I think compassion and kindness and forgiveness, like, will have a significant role to play, because the alternative is not pretty. Like anything that based on hatred or division, um, then might makes right, and that um, that's not a future I'd like to participate in.
Hmm. Yeah. So what I'm getting is that there's such an urgency that we need the most powerful, skillful means combined with mindful, compassionate, kind of metacognition packed together to help us the most to wake up as a species and to kind of avoid a future that we don't want.
Yeah, like that's a global utopian view, and that's not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen, I think, on the scale that we need. But I do think we have the agency within our maybe very small communities, families, wider friend network, maybe new forms of political assembly that can be based on collective practices that as a small aligned community and polis like the city states um, can build maybe some form of resilience to get through this. And that's my hope. And how that's exactly going to work, we don't know, but we got to start somewhere. Um, and what I'm if that can at the same time also speak to the increasing sense of despair, of nihilism, of the amount of depression and anxiety and fear around the ecological crisis, if it can provide like individual answers to support that, I think that's great. And especially if we can move to purpose and consider what are different ways of thinking about spending our time and spending our energy on, as opposed to following that old logic of extraction. And I think these things will coexist for a while. And then at one point, hopefully, some versions will establish themselves um, sufficiently solidly enough that it can provide a way forward for a set of people and a set of beings, because it's not going to be humans alone, I think,
Mhm.
because humans alone don't survive very well. We're very
Mhm.
dependent, very,
What
very
beings are
dependent.
those that you mean? Other spiritual beings or more mundane?
Yeah. So one philosopher I'm deeply influenced by is the sometimes called the most well-known philosopher you've never heard of, Bruno Latour. And he says there are many forms of beings. There's economic beings like the market. There are fictional beings like Harry Potter. There are things like team spirit. That's a being that can grip everybody and can win a match of any sport. Um, and so we need to open up our ontology to figure out like what kind of beings do we want to include. And so um, and which networks to align with, to ally with. And so one way of looking is on the ecological crisis. Clearly, we have aligned ourselves with 5 plant beings that are the main crops, and like 5 uh, animal beings that we primarily eat. So it will probably be some kind of collaboration with these beings. Well, then they are dependent, on grasses and fungi and trees and all that. Okay, that's probably needed. Well, we need to stop carbon, like the impact of carbon and methane on some level. So okay, we need to probably ally with some beings at massive scale to prevent the worst excesses. Like we'll probably hit 2 degrees, but then like any 0.1 degree up is catastrophic above 1.5, and we're you know we're scooting past that with a
Mm,
crazy speed, um and so we probably need to figure out like rewilding at scale, and
mm,
that's an allyship with a lot of beings. So that's kind of the ecological equation. But then the internal, like you could say that communities are governed by beings. Like our psyche, we assume as modern people that all our thoughts and emotions and dreams are something that just comes from some place inside us, inside our psyche. But this is not necessarily how, if you observe, like we are totally being influenced by the outside all the time, and um, and from the inside. There are many drives that overwhelm us at times, and so things like values in for example in a Buddhist community, things like compassion, you could see as a being that possesses people. Sometimes you are possessed by compassion, and that aligns people. And so some beings are pro-social, whereas some things like racism or um, sexism or that divides people. And so in some communities, those beings are not welcome,
Mhm.
and everybody pleases each other to make sure those beings are not there. And it's kind of a novel way of thinking of things. But you could draw that line even further, and you could say that if you would do a tantric ritual where you invite even beings of transformation and beings of religion. Those are specific beings that are real. You can experience them, but they might be real and constructed. So dependent on the right ritual, the right ceremony, the right sacrament, the right practice
The
people,
right
you can
mantra.
mantra exactly. Then you can participate in an almost divine ontology where this type of work becomes um, um, like a sacred activity on the path to enlightenment, and that's an ontological possibility. I've experienced that plenty, and other people have, and so. But it requires a level of ontological openness and understanding, and that takes time. And so what I'm interested in, can we build these containers where we can develop these competencies and these ways of understanding that we can actually build a small community focused on this? And if that works for small, then maybe we can expand it. And maybe that can offer a answer or a possibility um, um, as we navigate, the the old world being, slowly collapsing, like the pressure on democracies, the pressures on, it's difficult for, I think, for a lot of old institutions to survive the next 20, 30 years. And if we don't have clear answers, I think we will automatically fall back to the things we've always tried, and I don't think that's necessarily um, a good thing. Um,
Mhm.
so sorry, another big answer, but that's
Yeah,
the theoretical underpinning of it.
I'm digesting as you speak, and so many visions and ideas and questions come up, and I can't hold them all. But I'm going to try to be congruent here because there's something really cool in what you're saying. What I'm trying to grasp is that, so kind of on your program that starts January 8th, and we'll revisit again the dates later for some clarity for listeners and viewers. But as I'm understanding you now, you're creating this container where people can slow down and learn the skills of openness, using or not using uh, potent sacraments that will accelerate potentially their awakening, so that we can steer in our meta crisis, polycrisis, into a more collaborative direction. I'm also hearing you say about institutions. You used the word polis earlier. And I believe that in the root of our Western society, at least if you place that root maybe somewhat arbitrarily in Greek culture, there were, of course, there was the tradition of the mysteries, and I think you can probably say a little bit more eloquently about that than me. But I believe there the leaders of the society were initiated in psychedelic ceremonies of very
Hmm.
high sacredness. And are we missing in our culture that kind of surrender? Of course, we are, you know, we used to be religious, but it also went a little bit in the wrong direction, perhaps. So we kind of separated from religion, but did we separate too much from spirituality or from some access to a higher organizational power? And now, as you said, we are trying to manage ourselves with our individualized egos, which is the grab and extract, as you say. So that, I guess, that's one question. Another one that you alluded to earlier, which is somehow connected, is that if you look at Tibetan Buddhism, I believe that has pretty shamanic roots. And as you said, I think yeah, some psychedelics may have played a role there. So how do you see that whole, if you kind of zoom out to the deep roots of our society, of tantric society, how that plays a part?
I think there is I would have, I think, really benefited when I came to age of a wisdom tradition that is alive, that provided initiation and purpose and direction. I think not having that awakening, that kind of collective vision quest of being able to recognize the world as sacred and our participation in it as a deeply ethical act, I think has provided a lot of room for other forms of seeing ourselves and behaving. And what we see are these very wild excesses of behavior that just inflate the ego. And what I found, where I think I've been very fortunate, is that I was able to experience that in a very short time, from 0 to 100, and realized, wait a minute, it doesn't really answer any of the fundamental suffering that I had. I think we need something else. But if you don't have that and you just strive for that your whole life, you will be none the wiser, so to speak. And so I think um, we see a huge interest and growth of spirituality. Like the spiritual marketplace is incredibly wide and diverse, and um, the many different types of networks and beings possible. I think with the ecological crisis, the invitation is, okay, what is what's the core of religion? And often I think classically it's seen as something that people depend on, that people consider sacred, and people send are collective around. And so that's the earth. And so one of the beautiful invitations that I resonate with is to become the diplomats of Gaia. We're not geoengineering. We're not dominating Gaia, because Gaia is way more powerful than us. Um, Even though I think it's hard to grok for a lot of like modern people, because like, well, we can just geoengineer our way out. I don't think that we have any proof that we are capable of managing such complex systems without, because I don't think it's infused with the right level of care, and I think it posits people above or um, outside our world. And so I think um, these traditions can help us hollow out ourselves to become like an empty vessel, in order that we can be possessed by something greater than ourselves. And I think that was a real possibility in religion for a long time, and it has. I think you could argue that that has been co-opted in classical power structures. But there's a real hunger for that for a lot of people. Um, what was the second question again? Sorry.
My question is around, yeah, I think you answered kind of one part of the question, that, yeah, there was this ancient Western understanding of the need for some way to connect with some humility to something higher. And I think we've lost
Mm-hmm.
that to some degree, not completely. And there's, as you say, a lot of hunger and endeavors. Terence McKenna called it the archaic revival of, what was
Right.
it? Of the archaic revival, I think he calls it generally. And also, I guess, just out of more maybe curiosity, the shamanic roots of Tantric Buddhism, and that
Oh,
seems
right.
completely
Mm-hmm.
aligned. I know on your website you also talk about the fifth precept, which I think you already addressed. But it's interesting when you look
Mm-hmm.
at the tantric roots of Buddhism, at least of Tibetan Buddhism.
Yeah. Sometimes Tibetan Buddhism is labeled as shamanistic Buddhism, and there were like two traditions. Like the shamanistic was more non-monastic, and monastic kind of sterilized over time, and that was kind of the dominant version that we were exposed to in the West. Um, but there's a huge overlap of shamanistic traditions in the Middle and South Americas, and that we saw in some of the Tibetan traditions. And I think personally, Tantra is very shamanistic. The mantra and breath work and visualization are, you could argue, put you in a state of trance that
Yeah.
allows you to being possessed by archetypal energies that basically um, are much wider, bigger than these very human top-down mental constructs that constrain our perception. And then you can have deeply mystical, visionary, prophetic insights. And you see this throughout the Tibetan tradition, and you also see this throughout the Middle and South America traditions. And you can get those experiences through drinking ayahuasca. And I've had those on ayahuasca where I was visited by a bodhisattva, as real as we're sitting here now. Of course, a clearly different ontological, like that being was not as real as this table is. But maybe it's more like the economic market is different, as a different reality, and it had a deep, deep impact on me. And has been a like an inspirational image or connection that I think I will take to my grave, maybe in future lifetimes even. And so that possibility, I think, is real and incredibly valuable. And there are many ways to get there. But it will require practice. It will require these contemplative skills. It require like some capacity to experience altered states through meditation. It requires some understanding how to work with concepts. It requires some inquiry and like what can I even consider something like that to be real?
Mhm.
Because if you're very much in a different camp, then that possibility is completely closed, and so
Yeah.
therefore you cannot have such experiences.
Yeah.
And
You're blocking it.
yeah, you're blocking it, or you're assumed, or your ontological commitments, they presuppose a possibility structure, and where some things are more likely than others. And so even on the level of your brain, the Bayesian weighting on those, they will always fall into maybe naturalistic explanations,
Mhm.
and so they just become like a mere um, like image as opposed to a real being, and
Yeah.
something gets lost by doing that. And the question is, can we, without falling into um, uh, into regressing forms of not presupposition. I'm trying to find the word bijgeloof.
Oh,
Uh,
superstition.
superstition. Yes, thanks. Um, can we be skillful with these experiences? And I think Buddhism, in particularly Tantric Buddhism, has such a beautiful wide toolbox to play around with that. And I think, actually, coming back to Robert Bay, I think he did beautiful, beautiful deep exploration of that in his later years of his work in soul making.
Mhm.
And that really brings back this unique, beautiful capacity that we humans have of the imagination as a ontological constructive faculty. And that's where I get excited, because I think we don't have that many really positive futuristic visions that don't blindly believe in this technological progress. Like, future will always be a form of progress. I don't think that's true at all. Um, and at the same time, we want to orient towards something of a positive ethical vision in the future, and I think that cannot be held without the ecological crisis in mind. And so for me, I think there hopefully there are many ways to do that, but the one I'm most interested in and most experienced with is Buddhism and psychedelics, because that's just in my path, and that's what I've been working with professionally for I don't know how long, last 10 years or so.
Yeah. I'm also struck by just how fucking cool it is what you're doing. Having all these beautiful conversations, but like just dude to dude, this is just amazing. I find it extremely interesting. Doesn't mean, of course, that everybody should just jump into this because it's cool, right? There are also some risks, especially if you take psychedelics. Something that I'm wondering about, does your course or program also offer something like psychedelic harm reduction? Should something go a little bit more challenging, or?
So the invitation is, unless you're already experienced and you have a community and a container and support in all these ways, it's not to go out and do psychedelics on your own. The invitation is, towards the end of the program, there will be a retreat specifically designed for this cohort that assumes if everybody is trained at least somewhat adequately on these practices, we can actually embody this ritual that can then bring forth this ontological possibility. And I think that's how, I think that's a core tenet in shamanistic visions, and I think that's what Tibetan and psychedelic practice have in common. And so for that retreat, there will be specific application to see readiness, and I would, we would have worked with people who will participate for almost a year. So there will be a clear assessment, like who's ready or not, and that's a really big key, because it can be destabilizing. And one of the ways we can consider how psychedelics work is by dissolving these higher order a priori beliefs that structure our reality, and they can dissolve things like agency, like time, identity, space itself. That can be incredibly destabilizing if you don't have kind of an awakened place where you can always land. If you don't have a stable, secure attachment to your awakened nature, then it's very easy to get fixated on some phenomena or some narrative and loop out or inflate, and that's not helpful for anyone. Can you completely reduce those risks to zero no matter what? No, but and that's okay, as long as you have the support and the skills to digest that and learn from that, and to get to that point, you need to have done some work to get there.
Yeah.
And so this program is not necessarily for pure beginners. Like I like to see some serious commitment to meditation, inquiry, therapy. I'm quite agnostic, but what I can see from the applicants so far is people who are serious about the path and have had experience with both for quite some time. They're just looking for ways to actually bring it to the next level, bring these things together, and level up their understanding of this work. Because understanding is a very key, understanding is a critical aspect to awakening. Even though it's sometimes very cool in some spiritual traditions to be anti-intellectual or anti-cerebral, anti-language even. But I don't think that is, you cannot really find that in Buddhism. I don't think that's correct at all. So you need a really clear map of the territory, and that will give you access to the right types of worlds or networks or insights, however you want to label that. And through meditation, you get the experiences, then you know exactly more what those labels mean, and then that's kind of like a synergistic process. And So the assumption of this program is if we all do this collectively and then come together in community and ritual and add a sacrament to it that opens us up to these different beings of religion, I think that in itself can be a beautiful, transformative, unique way of working with psychedelics. That which is the way I'm practicing myself, and it's not necessarily something that is very well developed. I see around, unless you go to very traditional context.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, what I'm getting is that actually there's a year-long preparation in your program, so it's really, really diligent. You're really screening people deeply and diligently. It's kind of the opposite of what you see, unfortunately, very often, I think, these days, where a lot of people that did one psychedelic ceremony or one experience, they are now psychedelic healers with the best of intentions, but with such a small skill set that I'm a little bit fearful for that. But I don't believe people would be afraid of or would need to be afraid of any of that in your program.
I hope not.
I hope not. I wanted to ask also, so your course is, as I can see and seeing your website, it's super well thought out. But still, what would be a good preparation for people? And one of the questions came to me, what book would you recommend they read before they join your course, for instance?
Will be good preparation. A lot of these insights you can't really get through books. There will be an extensive reading list, and I think books can really help you navigate and orient towards what you need to do. And there's a beautiful like the beauty of this training is that you will be connected to wonderful lineage holders and thought leaders that have that are practitioners in different traditions and have worked with psychedelics and have done research on it. And so if you find books by them, like I would highly recommend those, because they like there's one book called Psychedelic Experience by Dr. Aidan Leon. He's a dear friend of mine who teaches in the course. There's a book called Liquid Divinity, Ayahuasca and Ontological Approach by Dr. André van der Braak, who teaches in the course. There's Modern Tantric Buddhism by Dr. Lama Justin, who's my main Dzogchen teacher at the moment. Tremendous amount of knowledge around all of this.
Can I just interrupt? Did you just say that André van der Braak is teaching in your course?
Yes.
That's really cool. And the other person, the doctor, is also teaching in your course.
Yes. He came out with a book called Psychedelic Experience.
Yeah.
And he makes the argument that there are many forms of psychedelic experiences, and those occasioned by specific psychedelic substances is only a subset of that create highly novel, highly psychedelic experiences, but slow duration and low stability. Whereas meditation also creates psychedelic experiences, but much longer duration, much more stable. And so if you really want to open up the capacity for what is possible for awareness and consciousness, if you want to open up that range and play with it, which is basically the tantric invitation, combining them could be incredibly synergistic. And there is actually some research that shows that there's this famous 5-day Zen retreat that was held in Switzerland, and they found they gave half of the folks placebo, and the other half they gave I think a medium dose of psilocybin. Of course, it couldn't be blinded because it was obvious to everyone. So the data is somewhat, filled in with expectations and how people want to believe this has, positive effect. But what's unique about the study, they asked the people around the person who participated on how much they changed in certain dimensions. And what they saw, like the ones who had the karmic fortunate uh, um, uh, uh, opportunity to participate with the psychedelic, with psilocybin that's found in mushrooms. Had much more mindfulness, much more connectedness, much higher form of purposeness, much more considerate about the ecological crisis and what we're doing, and so I think psychedelics um, can kind of open us up to these more ontological possibilities outside of the Cartesian kind of massive dualities of subject object, inside outside, all these things before and after, and that does something with people. It makes them, on average, it seems, and this is my experience, and this is also my experience of having seen over 1,000 people coming through our retreat with synthesis. It tends, on average, there are exceptions, to make people kinder, more compassionate, help them slow down, less interested in forms of competition or consumption that feed ego inflation, because that comes much less um, um, interesting and meaningful, and caring and creating caring spaces becomes much more meaningful. And I think that is very very promising, especially in a time that we clearly need. There's a huge shortage on paths that help people develop that way, because we're so developed cognitively, logic, like that's language. It's like, so we trained hundreds, thousands of hours in school, but we're not trained how to communicate well, how to be caring to another, how to open our hearts, how to dream well, how to slow down, how to how to look beyond our human bubble. And so it's interesting that all these things are coming together, and that gives me a lot of hope, because my assumption is, if I can do it, I feel like I've gone through quite a long journey, then that's possible for other people too. And so it does me, it gives me great joy to see other people resonate with the program, because that means like I'm slightly less crazy than I thought I was.
Yeah. So if I were to do a great injustice to the level of nuance that I think you bring to the table, and I zoom out a lot, it almost seems like you answered the question that was alive since the 60s of what to do with set and setting. Your answer, Buddhism. Buddhism is a set and setting, right? And
a possible,
yeah,
one of the many, I think, wisdom traditions that I think we need to contour or to buffer a little bit, because I think psychedelics and other forms of ideology, they frighten me a little bit. Like you can see like psychedelics and right wing and spirituality and those, I think, belief systems are not built well. They are not completely resonant with all these other sets of knowledge that we've developed as a species, and that means they have forms of weakness. And I don't think they offer real answers. They offer very narrow answers for a very select group of people, and that means they're very unstable, and that creates a lot of suffering. And so that's not a path that I would recommend following.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe taking a note from that, because you have already a bunch of registrations for your program, and I'm sure more will follow. But of course, not everybody will be able to join. And yet many people today, this day and age, they take psychedelics. Maybe for the people listening or watching right now, they have a psychedelic habit, or they're going to go on a trip next weekend. what would be one suggestion or invitation from Buddhism to them in their practice? Should they be willing to try something like that? What could you say would be a good thing for them to invite into their psychedelic journey?
That's a lovely question. Thank you. I think an open question that they can bring into their journey or into their retreat or is, do I believe that a path to awakening and liberation is possible, whatever context you're coming from? If no, why not? And if yes, am I participating on a path like that with the care and curiosity that I deserve? And if the answer to that is no, like, what practical steps can I take? Can I can I um, can I spend a little bit more time in taking that maybe a bit more seriously? Can I find a teacher? Can I find a sangha, a practicing group? Can I start a therapy that I know I should be doing because I have some developmental or personality difficulty that is not helping me? Can I um, and I think wider, like, what, this is kind of around the ecological issue. Do I really believe that there is a human originated level of or climate change happening, global warming happening? And if yes, what are the reasons for my non-action? Because I think that is, I think on average, most people believe there is something happening. Yet there is very low participation in policies or pressures or decisions that and I think a big part of that is it's very hard to see what can we actually do, and we're so overwhelmed already, so our capacity is not very high, um, and at the same time it is one of the most pressing questions that we have. I think ethically, existentially, it's the defining crisis of our generation, and we have to do something with that. And so, what could be some steps we could be doing into educating ourselves, participating, and um, seeing the consequences of human impact um, as something to be responsible for, and um, I think we owe that um, to future generations. I really love this quote. Like, we don't inherit the world from our ancestors; we borrow it from our great grandchildren. And right now, I think at the same time, we have higher comfort and medical care and lifespan than ever before. At the same time, it feels like to ask anyone to give a little bit of that up, even I think it's like 3 to 5 GDP, and we can stay under 1.5, and the inability to even make that slight, what is wrong? Like, why is that so difficult? And I think that in itself reveals this egoism that's so deeply inside from our conditioning, that we can't even consider that. Like, and so we might open that up, that level of care and generosity, to people that are very close to us, but we make these artificial boundaries, like, well, that's a neighbor, I don't know him, or I barely know him, maybe just know his name. I'm not gonna do the same thing for him as I do for my child. But that capacity to open up our sense of compassion, I think, is one of the greatest capacities that humans have. And it's also one of the wisest, because we are in the same boat. Spaceship Earth we have one of them. We don't have a backup. And so trashing our back garden and pretending it's not ours is delusional. And I think Buddhism and psychedelics can both be incredibly powerful ways to explore all the ways in which we are deluded and see like it's not helping us. It's not even giving temporary relief if you look closely. And I think that's one of the gifts of meditation, where we can see those tendencies and then we find ways to work with them, make them manageable, and then we can clearly see if we do that less and less, and we act in those ways in fewer ways, happiness goes up, our level of connection goes up, our purpose goes up, and then at one point becomes something very natural, because it's the only way we can. It becomes the entering the stream, like where it's kind of like this lazy river. Like we've meditated enough, we've done enough, then we need to keep going. We shouldn't get out of the river. Sometimes we get stuck and we got to push ourselves from the side again, but it becomes effortless over time. And that's the gift of the whole path, where awakening is not something you are, it's something that becomes you. You're possessed by awakening. And that's such a gift, like that. I'm thankful every day that I've had the insights and the teachers and the support and the books that I've had that co-constituted my interiority at such a level that I was able to find compassion and forgiveness in difficult moments, because it's what I got in return was beyond measurable.
And I also believe that meditation rejuvenates the skin.
Oh, does it?
It does. So for the superficial entry levels, that is even there. But that's really beautiful. And that is actually a nice bridge to my last question. But before I want to pose that one, just want to remind people that you have a Q&A coming up on 18 December. And your course or your program starts January 8th. So there is still some time, but not that much. Anything you want to say about the course itself, the program, and your Q&A?
Yeah, if you just want to hang out and ask some questions and get a feel for me and you're very free to join or watch the recording. The program is 12 months, and every month there's a team, and it's structurally built to build like these contemplative skills that I think are essential if you really want to be skillful working with psychedelic. But beyond that, they will have tremendous, beautiful impact on and just your own capacity for emotional regulation and stress and all those things that are really important. But it can lead you all the way to awakening and yeah, I find that something very worthwhile doing. With tremendous guest teachers and guest faculty, and just to be introduced to these teachers, I think is also a tremendous gift. And there'll be guided meditation. So worst thing is you can just every day you can just listen to me or read or find an alternative meditation and progress on the meditative path. Yeah, I think it's priced very, 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 very reasonable, and can be very sweet. As far as I can tell, it's going to be such a sweet group of people that care about these things and want to connect on these things. So that's really great. I think it's going to be a special year.
I find it extremely inspirational, and for me, you are the definition of walk your talk. I think people should completely check it out, especially just go to the Q&A, which I believe is free, right, for anybody interested.
Of course. Yeah.
And it sounds completely awesome. And then it leads me to my last question. We are in a dire situation. I think a lot of things are going very well, but honestly, we're in a polycrisis and meta crisis. It's a bit dire. So, maybe society will end as we know it. Maybe it'll all collapse and the Kali Yuga is going to end in a big explosion. I hope not, but maybe it does. And so maybe mankind needs to start over, I don't know, 500,000 years from now. Our civilization is completely ruined, ashes, nothing left, except there's this one flash drive that is found. And it just so happens to contain the very last bit of information from our present culture. And it is this podcast that we're recording right now. But it's only the last 5 minutes. It's only the last 5 minutes of the podcast, and so you have one chance to speak to the future. What would be your message for future humanity? No pressure, just a small question. What would you tell them? What would be your invitation, your message?
Well, some of us have made it, and never forget that our capacity to love is immeasurable, and the life is incredibly precious and incredibly short, and caring for each other is a beautiful virtue that provides gifts beyond recognition. So thank you for getting through the most difficult time, and we from the past root you guys on, and hope you guys are wiser and more compassionate and more caring than we were managed to do.
Oh,
I think there's nothing I think we could be telling them that they don't already know. But I hope they I hope they find other things. Like I hope they have like all the best books on how that's my fantasy, having all the information, and hopefully about plants and animals, and and about how to clean up the mess that we made. Because they're like stories that make me very hopeful and also very sad. It's like a very split way of the abundance that the explorers found in First Nation peoples. Like there were like turtles so loud. There were so many that people couldn't sleep. There were like so many eggs. Like the bison was like beyond the horizon, and the world was so incredibly abundant. And we've traded all that biomass in for humans and cattle primarily. And according to a lot of indigenous narratives, like collapse has already happened. Like their world is now, just to be very blunt, it's like it's translated into parking lots at Walmart, and their ancestors don't speak anymore. Their languages have died out for a large part. Their way of life was, based on all these other beings, on sacred bison, on sacred elk. They're gone, or basically gone, and so I'd like to invite everyone. There is a future vision of bringing that wildness back and rewild our minds, rewild our gardens, our agriculture, connecting all those spaces. And I think nature can bounce back. And I sincerely wish things don't have to get much worse for people to wake up to that. And because we have so much power, so much might. It's very easy to see how we can destroy ourselves. And it's just a stupid way of using that beautiful skill that we got, and I think that's what in Buddhism I find speaks to me it's like we have this tremendous potential, and we can do it to be barbarians. We can do that. We can very well connect with our vulnerability, and then use that to see how we can torture other people because we know our weaknesses so well, or we can do that for developing tremendous compassion, and that can have far-reaching impact. And so every little thing helps. And so none of what I said was meant to be this grandiose, like utopian world revolution. This is about our world, our lives, and doing this work, you can create really beautiful relationships in your own life, and that matters. That matters so much, and I think that is worth spending time on and practicing and connecting and however you want to do that. There's so many beautiful ways that we found over so many cultures. So have your pick. I spoke with a really great individual this week, and this person got into druidry as connecting with their ancestry, and hearing them talk about it. So many overlaps. Like, it's not something I know much about, but so much overlap. And the Christian mystics like Meister Eckhart is a beautiful inspiration for me personally. I'm not a Christian, but I weep when I read him, and it touches the depth of my heart, and it makes me, I think, a better person. And I'm sure I can find all of that in any tradition. And I think that's one of the most beautiful capacities that we have as humans. And I see that in you, and I see that in our friends group, and that gives me a lot of hope because I didn't have that when I grew up, you know.
Mhm.
So it's growing, and it's great, and I'm glad we have that shared karma to connect on this. So thank you so much, Hans. You have a very sweet way of interviewing, and you made me look a lot better than than I really are. So if people join my program because of this and get disappointed, then I tell them to blame you.
I think it's difficult to hide your beauty, Martijn, and I'm very happy that it came out. And I think there's nothing fake about it. And thanks very much for coming. And just love listening to you. And I think your course is amazing, and people should go check it out.
Thanks a lot, friend. I
Yeah,
appreciate you, and I love you dearly, and thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Martijn Schirp, thanks very much.
My pleasure.